Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Abrams.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump into the question, shall we? The first question I want to ask you is, what is your definition of leadership?
I think leadership is three things. It's the ability to cultivate a collective vision of where you want to go. It's the ability to chart that course with the people who need to get where they need to be. And the third is being able to get out of the way if you become an impediment. I think leadership often requires understanding where you begin and where you end, and being willing to set something up that doesn't need you anymore.
So like the role you play in the whole process.
Absolutely. I think too often when you're a leader or when you are asked to lead something, it becomes part of who you are. And I think the truest show of leadership is your ability to become irrelevant and obsolete. And when that happens, you've done your job effectively, because the people you were designed to lead have taken ownership and they no longer require your services.
As a person who's considered an emerging leader, what are some of the lessons you've learned from past leaders in the African American community in the Metro Atlanta region?
I think first and foremost is understanding your constituency. The African American community is so much more diverse than it's often given credit for. As a graduate of Spelman College, being on a campus of African American women, you realize the expansive diversity there. So I think the first and foremost is recognizing how deeply mixed that community is, and that one solution does not solve all problems. I think the second piece is the willingness to cultivate other leaders. It is not sufficient for you to be the singular person. Leadership, particularly in Metro Atlanta, requires that others come along with you. Because number one, there's too much to be done for you to do it on your own. And secondly, you become too wrapped up in your own ideas unless you have others there who are willing to share their concepts with you and to challenge what you believe and what you think needs to be done.
Very good answer. Another question I have as a follow-up is, what do you think some of the major issues that we face as African Americans in the 21st century in the Metro Atlanta region?
I think they're the same issues faced by everyone. It's affordable housing, it's economic development. I think it's also the environmental challenge. Too often the African American community dismisses the environmental movement as something for those who have the luxury of time or the luxury of economy. But environmental justice takes, and the environmental movement takes in a larger expanse. It's the issue of asthma in inner city communities. It's the issue of traffic congestion. It's the issue of living in clean communities where you are comfortable going home and you look forward to waking up and spending your weekends. I think moving the African American community more fully into the conversation of climate change and environmental justice is going to be a critical issue in the 21st century. That's
interesting. I've never really thought about that before, but I can see how that can be a major issue. Another question I have is, as you're a student of history, you might not graduated with a degree, but you are a student of history, I know. And in looking at African American leadership, let's say late 20th century, early 21st century, how would you rate it? You could be 1 to 10, A to F. How would you rate it, and why would you give it that rating or grade?
That's an unfair question. I would probably rate it a 7. I think that any community that can maintain its cohesion and can continue its relevance at least rates a 6. There are communities that have fallen to the wayside and have either have not maintained their prominence or have lost their prominence. And the fact that the African American community still commands a great deal of respect and a great deal of political capital is a critical piece. I would rate it lower than an 8 or a 9 or a 10, because I think that we've diverged from the core issues that affect us, which are ones of economic development and more importantly, social capital. We have, I think, ceded our social primacy to those who are not really that concerned about what we look like. And by that I mean, I've no issue with the hip hop culture, with any of the cultural norms that have become part of the 21st century. But what we've lost is, I think, a critical internal moral compass that has really guided this community for centuries. Even in the time of slavery, our moral compass maintained our humanity. And I think more and more often we are losing that, and we've been egged along, or at least not chided sufficiently by our leadership, not only in the context of what we should be doing, but what we shouldn't be doing and how to do it differently. I look to Bill Cosby. I think he's probably most emblematic of the conversation that should be had. But I think more than Bill Cosby saying things, it's those community leaders on the very local level who have an obligation to not simply accept the degradation in their communities, but to really hold us all to a higher standard, including themselves.
Excellent response to an unfair question. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.